Hey everybody, this is Corey with Stafford CDC. This is the first video I've recorded in a long time, so hopefully this isn't too bad. If it's that rough, I'll do another take of this. But today we're going to be looking at the Arcform knives theory. Now, I'm looking directly at their website right now. Look at me being prepared. This is $340. The designer is Brian Keys, and this is manufactured by Rayot. And now one thing I do want to say, this exact version is $340. If you want the all satin version or the plain tie with satin accents, it's $310. $320 if you want to get black accents, and if you want black DLC with bronze accents, which seems to just be the thumb studs and the pocket clip, those are going to run you $350. So that is all the variants available on their website here. And with that, let's open this anyway, and then we'll get into specs. You're talking about M390 on the blade, and as I mentioned, a titanium handle. You can see the steel is marked right there. And of course you have Arcform on this side, both the logo and the name, something that's probably not necessary, but it is there. And you have this really interesting design. You're looking at an overall length of 8 1/8 inch, so 8.125, with a blade length of 3.5 inches, a 3.5 inch cutting edge. Your blade stock is a little bit thick at 0.14 inches. You can see it's I would say like your typical thick hard use knife blade stock starts around 1/8 of an inch, so this is going just a little bit thicker than that, giving you just a little bit more robust of a spine. And then you have 4.6 inches of handle. This thing comes in just under 5 ounces at 4.93 ounces, and you're looking at just under half an inch of thickness at 0.45. Now, all right, cool, perfect. I was hoping I'm seeing the information I'm looking at right now, which is that this has a flat grind. This is a pretty tall flat grind, and this knife is tall, so it's hard to show this off, but the grind gets fairly thin. So coming down to this edge, cutting performance is actually pretty good. Something that I noticed with this pretty early on, that was despite the size and the weight and the thickness of it, is that it actually was a decent slicer. As I mentioned, this is M390, so you have good blade steel combined with good geometry. This is going to perform pretty well overall. Excuse me. Now, the only demerit I'll give this knife is really for myself, because I cut my thumb pretty good on it 2 days ago. Basically, I went to close it and wasn't paying too much attention. I had choked up a little bit to go like kind of this spot, opening a package, and then I just rolled the knife, and where I would put my thumb for the lock bar, I did that and just pushed my thumb into the edge, and it cuts well. They'll tell you that much. Much lower you have to be to get to this lock bar. You can see kind of where that is. There's like this pseudo finger choil thing. It works, but it's probably not intended to be a spot for you to put your finger there, but it certainly works, and it's fairly comfortable. So that's something that I can't really complain too much about. And it's my fault. I cut myself. Obviously, no fault of the knife itself. Something I noticed with this, and it's super easy to avoid if it's your knife and you're carrying it all the time, is that this, after flicking it a bunch, it's fine now. You can see it's centered and has no blade play. But all of a sudden at work one day, I was just flicking this, killing some time, and I noticed it sounded a lot different. And on the close, it was sounding weird. And then I looked, and the blade was pushed like way over this way, kind of like this. I'm pushing it with my finger now. And the pivot was super loose. This is a big blade. As I mentioned, this whole thing comes in just under 5 ounces. So that weight of opening and closing, I think, just caused the pivot to walk a little bit. Something that if this is your knife, you just put a little blue Loctite on there. This is coming through pass around, so I'm not going to be taking it apart or anything like that. But I feel like it's worth mentioning because it is a bigger and heavier knife. That constant opening and closing fidgeting is going to affect those screws a little more, so I highly suggest using Loctite. Yeah, that's about all the bad that I have to say, which really there wasn't much. I cut myself like a moron, and the pivot can walk a little bit. That's that's basically the only negatives I have to say about this. I don't love that everything is black for the most part, except for these like stonewashed, like blasted and stonewashed accents here. I think if you're going to offer a blackout version, do a blackout version. The spacer here feels a little out of place, and it's also design choice wise not my favorite. It's sunk in, it's rounded off, and it sits under the scales there. You can see that the scales are just slightly taller, even at the top of that hump there. It's essentially the same height, but you still feel these ridges on both sides. And design choice, that's not my favorite, but it's aesthetics. I'm not going to get too much into aesthetic choices because that is simply not going to be the same for everybody. Ergonomically speaking, you're kind of looking at like a coffin style handle, very much like the old Bowie knives would be, where you flare out and then you kind of have this coffin shaped end. And what you have with that is a pretty standard neutral grip. It flares out a little bit towards the bottom, gives your pinky something to grab onto, and it's narrow enough up here to not be obtrusive, and it's not too narrow that it feels like you're only holding it with the bottom of your hand here. So in a hammer grip, this feels pretty good, as well as in a saber grip with the thumb up on the spine. It feels great being back here, and like I said, there's like this pseudo finger choil thing that I'm able to choke up to, even with my larger hands, kind of in between my two knuckles. And I had no issues catching the heel of this blade or anything, so getting right up in this position and cutting was just fine. The thumb stud, I guess, the studs, the discs, I don't really know what to call these exactly, but these like thumb pads that this knife has, they have some texturing on top of them, but I honestly don't like deploying it from the top. I find it much easier just to get kind of behind them and flick out. I think that's the easiest way to do this. And they're not textured on the sides. You can see there's nothing over there, but coming at it from kind of underneath on an angle, you get enough of that texture from on top. And of course, reverse flicking this works just fine too. Something that you might be looking at while this is closed, I know it's been open the majority of the video, is that you have all this exposed spine and jimping. And yes, you can front flip this. I'm not sure if it was designed to be, but it certainly is front flippable. And it works fairly well. It's a little far from the pivot, meaning you should have pretty good leverage, but because it's kind of angled downward like this, it doesn't feel perfect. It can be a little awkward trying to kind of get that pressure right because of that. And you can see I'm just not quite locking up sometimes. You gotta really get your thumb out of the way. And because it's so far over, it's a long distance to get your thumb. So a little wrist helps with that, but I just preferred using these thumb pad things for my deployment. It's running on bearings, so the action is great. I mean, it's a Rayot-made knife. I'm sure you can expect these kind of things, like action-wise, detent-wise, all to be really nice. So no surprise there. Ultimately, the Arcform theory is just, it's design-wise, it's not a knife for me, but it's not ugly, it's just different. Just ultimately, this knife is a sub $400, really well made frame lock with a couple different options that if you love the design of, then get one. If you don't love one, then it's something that you got to consider. Do you want to spend $350 on it? That's entirely, up to the individual. Is it worth the money? Probably, I'd say. If you like the design, if you think this is something that you would love, a little bit more of a hard use knife, with this size, this design, everything, then yeah, sure, it's worth it at that point. But if you tend to like things kind of more along the lines that I do, thinner, slicier, kind of a slightly smaller package than this, not by a whole lot, but definitely thinner and slicier, then you might not be a big fan of this, but nothing bad overall to say about this guy. It performed really well. It exceeded expectations just from looking at it, so that was really nice to see, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think about the theory down below. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope this wasn't too long or too bad. Definitely longer than my more recent videos, so hopefully you guys enjoy hearing a little bit more about this, as well as hearing the specs and some information about it as well from the website. That's something I'm going to try and do more often, but I can't make any promises. Yeah, with that being said, I'm going to let you go now. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video and have a great rest of your day. Thanks and take care.